Well, we are so excited to have on the podcast Mindy Catron. Mindy is an MTCA parent, which of course is our most thrilling and exciting reason to have her on the pod, but also herself a fantastic Broadway actress. She studied at Point Park, where she got a BA in dance, has been on Broadway in Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, Ragtime, Christmas Carol, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, lots of national tours, including some of those shows, and Hello Dolly with Carol Channing, and is the mother of a class of 2023 MTCA student, Michaela, who I believe she just dropped off at Elon. Is that true?
Yes, class of 2024.
Don't make me say that wrong again. Class of 2024. That's 100% right. Oh my gosh, I always mess up the years. I know. We got that part right that you just dropped her off, but this year is 2024, which makes them 2024. Oh, you should have heard me at the, we did it at Meet MTCA workshop the other day. Every time I said juniors and seniors wrong of class of 2025 versus 2026, I was like, dang it. No, I mean 2027. Nope, 2026. Anyway, class of 2024. It's a lot to keep track. Luckily, we're going to talk about the ways that you're so good at keeping track of all this on the pod. But first off, welcome. We are just so excited to have you on. Of course, principally, I mentioned, being an MTCA mom and someone who's just gone through this process. I think that's the most essential part of it. But I also think it's really going to be helpful for our parent listeners to hear, we're having a diverse array of parents on. I kind of promised a couple different parent perspectives, but especially to hear this bucket of someone who, you really could have been an artist guest in your own right as just an actress, right? And to be able to speak from that parent perspective, I think it's going to be very different than a parent who's a business major or those kind of things. So we'll get into all of that from all those different angles. But before we dive into your parenthood, can we start with a quick journey of your career? And maybe even I'd love to start with your college journey. Do you remember the application and audition process? Do you remember maybe especially from you, like 16, 17, as you started thinking about what I'm looking for in a college experience? What was that as you were doing your own approach?
So my experience was vastly different. I grew up in a very small town in upstate New York in the country, very rural. I didn't really have the opportunity to get deeply involved in dance until I was in high school. And when I say deeply involved, the most I could do was one day a week. Unlike anything like my kids and many of the kids have the opportunity to do now where we are. So while I always knew that I wanted to be in musical theater, it seemed ridiculous. It seemed like something just not within any sort of reality. Didn't know what I wanted to do. I went to SUNY Geneseo my freshman year as an elementary education major. But that's another podcast because that would be the worst career ever for me. But I was a dance minor because I did love to dance. But I didn't have years and years of training under my belt. I started relatively late at like 16, getting more serious and involved. I guess I had a lot of natural ability. So during the course of my year there, the head of the dance program at Geneseo, which was not a major, just a minor, said, you need to go do this. You've got what it takes. You've got some hard work to do, but you just need to go do this. And that really was all I ever wanted to hear and all I ever wanted to do. The shortest story of this is that luckily my parents got on board. And then I worked that summer in a show that was local upstate, but all the dancers, with the exception of myself and like one other, were hired from Point Park. And I had yet to figure out what I was going to do, how I was ever going to pursue this industry, this business. And then I met all these dancers from Point Park who just said, you have to come to Point Park. And so I called Point Park in like July before the school started in September 1st and said, I'd love to come to your school.
And luckily, that's still how it works today. You just call the school and say, can I come attend? And that's it.
I drove down. They arranged for an audition. I showed up, did a couple of dance classes, and then walked into an office and they said, we love you. You're great. Classes start in 2 weeks. Here's a scholarship to help you get here.
Wow.
I cannot relate to what the kids have to go through today is what I'm getting at. It was
Though you certainly can, having gone through it as a mom now. But to give me a little bit of your parents' experience. So were your parents, did they know at 16, 17, would you say, hey, I want to go be a professional dancer? And they were like, that's not realistic. You should be early education. It seemed like they were supportive, certainly, of you making the jump after freshman year, I guess. What was that conversation if you were to have said to them, I think I want to be a professional dancer, professional actor?
I
What
don't
would they have said?
I don't recall that I ever said that, but
Mhm.
all I did was perform.
Mhm.
I'm in my town, you were a cheerleader. So I was the head of the cheerleading team and we were
Mhm.
competing. And then I was always in the community theater show. I was in the high school show. I got involved with the dance studio and was always doing stuff there and competitions. And I just was always doing it. And everybody always talked about how natural I was. And my
Mhm.
parents were always so proud of how natural I was. But I don't think I really ever voiced out loud the desire to pursue it because it just seemed very far away.
Right. In the same way, if you play baseball in high school, you might not think I'm going to be a professional
Yeah,
baseball player. You go, that's some people do that, but those are other people. Who are those
yeah.
people? Yeah.
It's all about the teachers in my life. This dance
Mhm.
teacher just said, "You need to go do this." And I went home for Christmas break and showed my parents. She wrote me a letter
Mm.
and like slipped it to me on opening night of a concert that we were doing for a semester. And I brought it home to my parents and like handed it over, going, "So this happened,
Mhm.
and I actually would really like to consider this." And the first response was, "We don't want you to be poor."
Yep.
Um, To which I said, "Well, I don't have to be."
Mhm.
I don't know what I thought I knew, but
And yet you were right. You don't have
I
to be.
actually was
Yeah.
right. I
Yeah.
actually was right. And my parents came and they sat down with this college professor, asked her all the questions, and
Mhm.
she, spoke on my behalf of how much she believed in my ability. And so my parents went, "Well, then that's it. You just have to do this." And they really never
Cool.
looked back and were huge supporters and enablers of me launching off into doing this.
Shout out to your parents. That's awesome. And
Yeah.
and we're going to talk about the different examples of parents, but that sounds like a parents who maybe didn't come from the industry, so didn't have that knowledge, which is a little
No,
bit different than your own experience.
no knowledge,
Yeah.
never had any knowledge of how all this works.
Yep. What about, let's talk a little bit about your journey to success in the Broadway world. We have a few other kind of dance focused artists coming on, which is something, again, I've been trying to focus on. It's not my area of expertise. So I'm always like, how do I talk about dance with people? But one of the big questions I'm always interested in, it feels like often dancers have these kind of interesting and unique paths to how they break in, especially, and
Mhm.
sort of what that process was of like, building up cred when if dance is your biggest skill and of course you may be an amazing singer and actor as well, but if dance is the thing you go, hey, this is what I'm leading with, which most Broadway performers, they are there principally for their dance if you think about just number wise in terms of being an ensemble. How is that something that you lead with in terms of like agents and managers and before all the big directors and choreographers? How did that way of kind of getting your foot in the door work for you?
So, I always knew that I wanted to do musical theater, always. I never was
Hmm.
like, "I wanna be a dancer, I wanna do concert dance." That really was something very foreign and really unknown to me, but I knew that I loved theater. Dance is just what I so naturally did well naturally.
Yep.
Um, So I usually say that's just sort of that was my in. That's where my scholarship was.
Yep.
I didn't apply or audition to be a musical theater major. I don't even know if I knew there was a musical theater major at the age of 18 back
Yep.
then. But then I went to school with them.
And there
But
actually weren't that many. I mean, back then,
they
like, I
weren't.
mean, if anyone looking at this video, Mindy is quite young, of course. I mean, as you can tell. I mean, we're not talking about that, but really, when you talk about that long ago, I mean, they have exploded in terms of the number. There
No,
was
and there
a
weren't
handful.
even that many dance programs. And the little bit that I tried to research, there was no internet back
Yeah.
then. Um, Even the dance program, I knew I wanted my college degree. That was very important to me. The
Mm-hmm.
director of this show I got to do in the summer was a New York City director, and he said to my parents, he also sat down with my parents and I. He said, "Well, she could just move to New York and take
Mm-hmm.
class and just audition."
For
But
sure.
I wanted my college degree. I wanted my college experience, but I really felt that I wanted my degree. That was
Mm-hmm.
important to me to have that.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say to fall back on because even then and very much now, I hate that expression. Nobody
Mm-hmm.
falls back on their degree.
Mm-hmm.
But for lots of reasons, I wanted my degree.
Yep.
But there weren't a lot of most of the college dance programs were very ballet and modern focused, and that was
Yep.
not really what my interest was. I knew I needed the training.
Mm-hmm.
But I was looking for schools that had jazz and theater, and I just sort of literally just fell into the lap of Point Park, which
Yep.
turned out to be such the right place for me to be at that time. Um, I actually left college during my senior year to work,
Mm-hmm.
and I got far too many college credits through experience. I think the college realized very quickly that they might have started something they didn't want to
Uh-huh.
continue, and they sort of shut down.
Uh-huh.
I spent most of my senior year working on cruise ship that I had done
Uh-huh.
a summer contract for. Um, and the ballet teacher of the program had to approve my going and giving me these
Mhm.
credits. And she was like, "One more year, you could be in any company you wanted to be in." And I said, "That is so kind that you have that much faith in me, but I don't want to be in a dance
Yeah.
company. I just want to do theater." So for me, dance was just my way in. I
Mhm.
started training vocally, and I had to fight to take an acting class in college that was with the acting majors because they
Mhm.
didn't let us do that back then.
Mhm.
Um, but yes, that was my sort of in. And so ensemble work was the bulk of my career was ensemble work, which I loved being in the ensemble, the
Yep.
chorus. I got to be a dance captain.
Yep.
Eventually I got some very nice opportunities to play some roles. But yes, I was a dancer first and foremost. And I was proud of that.
Yep. And I didn't read this from the bio, but yeah, you mentioned a dance captain. You helped with auditions at one point,
Yeah.
and being able to swing. I mean, to be able to be that versatile, play multiple positions on the team. It's like that is so valuable, and it's what most of a big Broadway company they need to be. Principally, they're not the ones speaking at the most period of time. You have 20 people on stage.
I
You're
didn't
normally
get
not the
to
one speaking.
swing until pretty much the very end of I'll say the end
Hmm.
of my career before I actually had Michaela and sort of stepped back from
Hmm.
performing. But I had been a dance captain on Ragtime for quite some time. I helped trained a lot of the swings, but I was in the show.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, swings really are the backbone of a company.
But basically, so you're working on cruise ships, and I guess most people can understand, as I guess can I, of like you go to a big dance call. If a cruise ship is auditioning or something, you go to a big dance call. How are you, sort of breaking from cruise ships into the New York theater scene and Broadway? Like, how are you getting? Are you just going to big equity dance calls, or do you have agents and managers submitting you for stuff at all, or is it that's coming later? How is it working in terms of
I
your
didn't actually
relationship with
work
agents?
with an agent for many years. You didn't need an agent. I think that has maybe changed a bit. And again, I'm not even fully versed right now and on where things are right now. But no, I didn't have an agent for many years. I
Hmm.
had a very unusual path. I did not go straight to New York. So from college, I went to the cruise ships.
Hmm.
And then I had to go back for the summer to finish out my degree. There was some academics I had to finish up. So I kind of graduated in August instead of May from
Hmm.
Point Park because I had spent that year working. Um, I actually moved to LA because at the time, in my mind, there were going to be a lot of shows back then were auditioning big shows, national
Hmm.
tours and Broadway shows were it was not uncommon them for to have auditions in New York and in LA.
Hmm.
I had spent a summer 2 years prior, in LA on just a dance studio scholarship. I got to go for like a month or 6 weeks and just take classes, and I gotten somewhat familiar with that little bit of, time out there, and
Hmm.
my sort of harebrained idea at the time was I'm going to go to LA to get my Broadway show to
Mhm.
bring me back to New York because there won't be as many dancers at those calls.
Already thinking strategy.
And
Mindy's
I
thinking
know
strategy even back then.
I was like, I know what I'm doing, but if I go
Mhm.
to New York with 800 other girls in this
Mhm.
hall, and like, you don't even know if you're going to get seen. I mean, Charlie, I don't know if it really was founded on anything other than just some thoughts in my head.
Uh-huh.
Um, and it did actually work for me in
Yep.
the end.
And you were at a smaller dance call than you imagine you would have been in New York, and that's how
Oh,
you booked the Broadway show?
in LA?
Yeah.
Absolutely. At that time, especially, when
Genius.
there was a dancer, singer, chorus call, whatever, when I would show up to those, I would say the vast majority were not theater
Right. They're
dancers.
models or whatever, and you're like, "But I know
Well,
how to
we
dance
were
and act."
video contemporary, what we would call now
Mhm.
contemporary dancers. They were doing
Mhm.
videos. They didn't really dress the way you dress for a musical theater call. They
Mhm.
didn't sing. I'm not the best singer, but I am a good singer. I'm a very good musician, which is
Mhm.
kind of how I always kept working, I would say. We might have the best, biggest voice, but I've always played instruments. I'm a very good
Uh-huh.
musician. I can hold my parts, whatever. So for me, it just worked. I walked in, I got my first little tour, I went back to LA, and then I got Joseph. I got a couple shows. One was a first
Yep.
national, one was Broadway. I chose Joseph,
Yep.
and we went from LA to New York, and and then I kind of went back and forth over the years. Moved back to LA for a while.
Yep.
Um,
And
yeah,
then how are you navigating that? I think especially from the ensemble, it can be really tricky of like, I think most if you're playing a Broadway lead, for the most part, you're not going to stay in a show for 5 years, right? But I think some ensemble members do stay for a long period. Sometimes they call it the corporate job, where you go, it's paying the
right.
bills, and I don't want to leave the company or whatever, right? Like, how did you navigate that? Because you're going to be doing someone who does multiple tours, multiple shows. How are you thinking about like jumping from show to show? Are you immediately auditioning for the next show while you're in one of the shows? How are you thinking about like, here's how I want to have a career with a bit of longevity? That maybe has a more diverse range of shows than just, the first one that I happen to book.
Right. That's a really good question. I think some of it is just circumstance. In my case, I joked that the bulk of the big shows that I got to do, I seemed to work with them all for 3 years. Seemed to be like
Mhm.
the magic number. Whether that was pre-Broadway, then Broadway, then maybe I went back out on tour with it. So, and you know the joke: when you're working, you think you're never going to be unemployed, and then when you're unemployed, you think you're never going to work.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know. You just fall into a rhythm. And when I was in New York doing shows, I would certainly audition for other shows.
Mhm.
And sometimes the show I was in actually sort of brought me to the next job, whether it was
Uh-huh.
choreographer or director. Um, I got lucky enough in time that some of my jobs came to me. I didn't look for them,
Mhm.
where I would get a call like Chitty. I got a call. I landed back on US soil from my honeymoon and turned my phone on and got a call that said, "Hey, we need a vacation swing and we think it should be you." And I was like, "This is the best job way to get
I
a
just
job."
got back from vacation.
I had worked
Fantastic. I'm
with
great at
yeah, I
vacation.
had worked with the dance captain and the resident
Yep.
choreographer, and they were like, "We need to hire somebody. Let's just see if so
Yep.
I got kind of lucky in time, and I think a lot of that just comes from work ethic and perseverance, and you
Yep.
just keep showing up.
Yep.
Um, it's nice to be looking for another job while you still have a job.
Mhm.
And then there were times in between when I didn't.
Yep.
But I was pretty lucky. I didn't really ever have a lot of um, real jobs
Right.
that
You're not
weren't.
waiting tables a ton for too many years
I
in a row or
didn't.
whatever. Yeah.
I never had a job, an interim job. I
That's
managed to
awesome.
kind of sustain myself. I'm not going to say there weren't some dark and deep, dark times, but I managed. I
Yep.
managed.
It's so cool. And then how did you navigate this sort of exit from the business? Like, did you always know, hey, it's X number of years, or hey, I want to have kids and I'm not going to try to, keep being an actor while I'm raising kids. I know I want to move out of the city.
Mm.
How was that experience for you? Of in terms of, and it seems like not uncommon, especially maybe who are people who are more dancer focused, that they may say, I can't do 50 years of this. At some point, my body is not going
Yeah.
to be able to handle it.
I mean, I don't think the 20-something-year-old me had an answer to that question, but I
Hmm.
think how I usually explain it is that I felt very, very lucky. Like I said, I didn't ever have another gig, another job, a side job. I feel like while I don't have a resume or a career that might show a lot of things to the someone outside of the industry, to me, I felt really lucky. I got to do so many really great jobs.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't feel like I missed out on anything.
Hmm.
Got to do some principal work. Would I've loved to do more principal work? Yes, but I
Hmm.
didn't. But I was. There's no regrets.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think what happens is you start to get older, and your body as a dancer starts to get older. Like I had some injuries. I started doing Pilates as part of my PT. On my last big national tour, I was one of the older dancers at 31 and was always doing
Wow,
Pilates.
31.
We went to,
Yeah.
to stay healthy and keep going. And, the friends I worked with would joke, "Oh, you're just going to teach Pilates one day." And I said, "Oh, no, no, no. I will
Hmm.
never teach Pilates. Way too much responsibility. Got to help people, know how to help them, not hurt them. No, 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 no." And here I am now,
Yep.
20 years later. I teach Pilates and own a studio, which I thought I'd never do. But I think the reality is that I started to realize, yes, I got married, I wanted to have a family. My husband's also in the business. He's a
Hmm.
stagehand, a lighting electrician.
Seems to be how it goes. It's always the ensemble with the stage-hands. That's us find a way to pair up
Yeah,
together. It
we
seems
all
like
got time
that's
backstage. Yeah.
that's what it is somehow. Yeah.
um, yeah, I think I realized that yes, we very much wanted to have a family.
Mhm.
And I have friends who both spouses are in the industry, and it's hard.
Mhm.
And I didn't really wanna do that, and I feel really lucky I found something else I like to do.
Yep.
So I started teaching. I got my certification. I started teaching, and for me, it just worked. So
I
do
love
I
it.
miss
Yeah.
performing? Sometimes, but not very much because I feel pretty blessed. I kind of did what I wanted to do.
We also don't know it's over forever. There could be comeback tour that could be coming for Mindy. You never when you hang your hat up, you don't throw the hat away. It's just hung
Hey,
up. You can always
there's
take it
going
off
to
the
be that
rack.
show about all us retired Broadway dancers. I'm sure of it, right?
I believe in it. I believe it. Okay, I would love to talk more about your career, but I know people are dying for
Yeah.
some MTCA parent juice, of which I know you have a lot to deliver. So we're going to take a short break and we're going to dive into the process from the other end here. Okay, we are back with Mindy Catron. So first off, I just want to talk a little bit about your approach to this process now as a mom. So when you first knew that Michaela was going to be interested in pursuing in this at the college level, obviously you're a family that knows something about the business. You have both parents working in the industry. And I think, you are someone who could have given some real direct feedback to Michaela. Was that ever considered that you might be like, hey, I'm going to try to save some money and maybe you're going to lead the process artistically and I'm going to seek out maybe college advising or anything that you didn't have as much knowledge in? But how did you kind of consider this is how we're going to approach this process from kind of a feedback coaching perspective?
Um, well, I knew that I could not be her coach.
Hmm. Because
Um,
of your relationship with Michaela, you're like, she would not want that.
no, she
Yeah.
would not want that. Neither of my kids really want my opinions ever.
Can't
Uh,
wait. Looking forward to that.
they don't bring me that, they don't sit down and sing a song for me and say, "What do you think?" Ever.
Uh-huh.
Like that
Uh-huh.
just doesn't happen. And I don't pry. I respect that because I get that actually very much. But
Would you have wanted that if Michaela had said, "Oh, mom, you're a Broadway actress. Can you help me?" Would you have been like, "I got this. I'm going to coach you."
yes.
Uh-huh.
Um, yes, I would have if she were open to that. But the reality is, the truth is, I don't know the industry right now, and I certainly don't know the college audition process.
Hmm.
That is a very I didn't know
You
anything
know the
about it.
college phone call process more than the college audition process.
Yeah.
Call them
I was
up. Can I
like,
join? Yeah.
train, what are we talking about?
Yeah.
The studio where my kids train, we have watched several other kids ahead of her go down this path.
Uh-huh.
So I had heard snippets of what they were done, and most of them had worked with MTCA. So I had heard little rumblings, and I was trying to kind of keep my head in the sand
Yep.
as long as I could about it until
Yep.
I couldn't anymore.
And was it clear from an early age that Michaela was going to do it at a college level? Like, was there a moment of decision where you go, oh, I guess we're looking at BFAs? Or, I mean, obviously she was someone who was dancing and acting and singing, but were you like, hey, I don't know for sure if we might be a chemical engineer? Or was it like, oh no, we're going down this path?
Um, she, yeah, she, she just had it,
Hmm.
and she had the drive and the passion for it. I always, I think I often say that Michaela, actually, both my kids have dragged me to the studio. I never pushed my kids
Hmm.
to the studio. If anything, I was the one going, but wait, that's
Are you
just so
sure?
much. It's just
Yeah.
so much. Like you're
Yep.
also super smart and you're like
Yep.
really good at school and you could do so many other things.
Yep.
If Michaela were here, she would tell you that I pushed her for a while towards architecture.
Uh-huh.
'Cause she's so creative. She's very creative. She's a good, she can draw. She's a very good artist
Yep.
that way, and she's very good with math, and I was like, "You should look into" like, I kinda gently was encouraging other things, but the reality was, I mean, my husband and I, the first time that, she did something, we were looked at each other, we said, "Well, we're it. We're sunk. This is
Yep.
it.
That's
There's
it.
no turning back." Like,
Yep.
um, yeah, it
Yep.
just if you know her, you just see that this is just what she does.
Yep. It's I understand it well. I'm dreading the possibility that that could be true for us as well. We're saying, "Oh no, she'll be in STEM, she'll be in whatever," and then
Yeah.
people are like, "No, she's not." And we're like, "We don't
We
know. We don't know. You don't
We
know."
tried sports for a while. I was like, "I think she's a be a really great tennis player."
Yep.
Nothing
No.
stuck.
Mm-mm.
Nothing stuck except the performing arts studio.
Okay, so you had heard some rumblings about MTCA, but what made you seek out us specifically? And and again, I told this to Brian when he was on the podcast. This, of course, does not need to be a commercial for us. We would love listeners to really hear your honest evaluation of, like, if you looked at different companies, if you knew hey, I want this kind of company, or if I don't even want someone that sort of specifically does college prep, but you can
Yeah.
seek out, because you certainly would have also known. You ended up with, ironically, a coach in Ann Nathan, who was in a show with you doing Ragtime forever
Yeah.
ago. But you would have known individual actors where you could have said, hey, can you help me with the college monologue? Can you
Yeah.
help me with whatever? So I guess what made you end up deciding to go with MTCA when you did?
Yeah, it's a good question. I didn't know if we needed a coaching company. I felt like Michaela has really solid training, and her studio,
Mm-hmm.
to some degree, would be not to some degree, that doesn't sound right. They would very much be willing to help her. But I also felt like that this performing arts studio is 100% involved in the current year and the current training
Yep.
and everything they do for their students.
Yep.
That for me to ask them to do something more just
Yep.
felt like that doesn't seem right. They're in that lane
Yep.
there. And so I talked with a couple friends who had their students go through this, who'd worked with you. I don't think all had. I'm pretty sure all had
Mm-hmm.
not.
What's
But
wrong with those other ones? What do I have to do? What have to talk to them? Give me the names.
but I think at the end of the day, I jumped on the website. We did the consult with Leo,
Yep.
and I the process is so, I don't like to say it's complicated. It's really not complicated,
Mm-hmm.
but it's busy.
Yep.
There's a
It's a
lot of
lot.
things that
Yep.
there's a lot of requirements. And at the end of the day, I felt, why would we jump into this very tricky process and not let the people who know it so intimately help us along the way?
Yep.
Otherwise, I think I would have just been second guessing
Yep.
ourselves, second guessing maybe some of the coaches, the outside coaches we might have worked
Uh-huh.
with. It just felt, and we live right outside of New York City,
Yep.
so we're
We're
here.
here. Yep.
It just seemed like a no-brainer
Yep.
for us.
No, that's really well said, and I like you saying, I don't want to say the process is complicated. I actually, I think I often have said it's complicated. I often say it's like not hard, that nothing's hard, but really it's not even that it's complicated. It's just there is so many elements of it, but
It's
none of
that
them are particularly intricate. Nothing's like, oh, this is
no,
impossible to do. It's
no.
just weaving them all together where it can be overwhelming, if not necessarily complicated.
Yes.
Yeah. But what about discipline specific? Because I love you said, Michaela came in with training. I mean, I know I encountered Michaela, I think, for the first time at TPAP. Must have been right after her sophomore year, right? Is that
Yes.
right? So
Yes, and that's
going
also part,
2022, is that right?
she she had the best experience. She did TPAP for 2 summers,
Yes.
and she loved you, and she loved so many that she
Of
worked
course
with,
she
and
did.
so
Yeah, she's got
but
good
that
taste.
also
Yeah.
helped.
Yeah. But
She felt she already started to feel familiar
yeah,
with so many of
what an
you,
ethos of an
and
MTCA would be like.
yeah,
Yeah, but I was going to say from a skill set perspective, I'm saying was remarking that she was a sophomore because or a rising junior, I guess, when I met her, but I wouldn't have never have thought that. I don't always track of what are you and
yeah,
where are you in the process. But then when she came back another year, I was like, oh my gosh, you're only now going to be a senior. Like I had thought from the first year, hey, this
yeah,
person's ready to be doing. And there was nothing. If you'd lined Michaela up with all the other rising juniors at the time, no, rising seniors at the time, absolutely from a skill set perspective was they're equal. So you would not have thought, oh, this is somebody who's green in any area, really, kind of
okay,
across
yeah.
the board. Was there something when you thought about, hey, discipline wise, someone who clearly was a very strong dancer coming in already? Was there something that you thought, hey, we do need specifically, we want to focus on acting, want to focus on songs? I kind of looked back at Michaela's knack. I think she did a pretty typical across the board,
Mhm.
various disciplines, but not a ton in any one discipline. It wasn't like, oh, we really seem to focus a ton on monologues or a ton on songs. Was there something that you came in and thought, hey, I think we're going to want more help here or less help here?
Definitely for monologues.
Hmm.
She did not at that time have a lot of experience doing monologues
Sure.
at all. So
Pretty typical. Yeah.
100% we were like, we need help with monologues. And
Yep.
I would certainly never be one to help with that
Yep.
either. Um, and then song choice.
Yep.
So Michaela has a voice teacher she's worked with for many, many, many years, who she loves and is phenomenal.
Yep.
But the I think Michaela just needed one other person to speak in about song choice.
Of how do we lead? You might have already had a book kind of built up or the
Yeah,
beginnings of a book, but going,
and
what's
some of
my
the
lead parts
songs
of these books?
originally early on, a couple, one if maybe not two of the songs that Anne was
Mhm.
considering were already in her book.
Mhm.
So it wasn't like, but it was just nice to have one person who, again, who knows the college audition process so well
Yep.
and seemed to have a good idea about what kind of material would go over
Yep.
best.
And then what about from a dance perspective? I mean, I noted from Candy's note of your first dance assessment, she wrote, "We're really going to be choreographing this together." Basically, just that happened in terms of how strong Michaela was already as a dancer. How did you utilize that, or how did she utilize that from a perspective of how she was going to shape her own little pre-screen choreography? For those who don't know, you need something like 60 to 90 seconds of a dance that you're putting together, showing off all your skill sets. How did she use another Point Park alum in Candy's case? How did
Yeah.
she use Candy in terms of helping her when she already had that skill set as strongly as she did?
Well, to be completely honest, Michaela was not intending to use Candy
Hmm.
for her dance pre-screen. She kept saying, "I can do it. I can do it. I
For
can
sure.
do it."
Yeah.
But it was mid-August, and I
Uh-huh.
was like, "So about that dance pre-screen that you need, like,
Just more
in
that she didn't do it than that she couldn't do
a
it.
month."
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and she hadn't
Yeah.
started her essays yet.
Uh-huh.
So she was solid on her songs and monologues, but just kept putting off the dance because I think, like, that's the easy part for me.
Right. Right.
So then I sort of did an SOS reach out to Candy and said, "Okay, we need to quickly pull this together because
Yep.
time is ticking,
Yep.
and I'm not gonna let her put it off any longer."
Right.
So they quickly came together and knocked it out and
Yeah.
loved working together.
Yeah, that's so
Yeah.
fun. I mean, it's so fun when it gets to be that way, where it's like two collaborators and not like I'm teaching you technique or I'm teaching you this beginning, but it's going, let's just show off, an outside eye to what you already do really well. Which, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so and when I want to get more into essays and organization as we go a little deeper, and we're going to get pretty granular here, I promise, in the process. But just to kind of start off, you've just gone through it. You just drove Michaela off to Elon. Do
Mhm.
you have any kind of big conclusions, big overarching conclusions you would draw from the experience, right? Is there anything that you feel like you did really right? You go, I would definitely repeat this if I did this again. And then anything, if you were to go back, you go, you know what, if I did this again, I would have tweaked this. I would have changed the way that we approach this.
I don't wanna sound like an ad because you did not pay me to be
No,
here.
you're allowed to sound like an ad, of course. Ad away.
I do think MTCA did a great job of explaining the process and letting me figure out
Mm-hmm.
what I can do to help.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I I feel kind of confident about how we managed last
Yeah.
year. I
I
feel
mean,
like
you
we
crushed it.
actually
Yeah.
had a great experience. Michaela loved her auditions.
Yeah.
That's a big step right there.
Yeah.
Auditioning was not something she loved. TPAP was a big switch around, like
Uh-huh.
huge, huge things changed for her
Uh-huh.
during those summers as far as how she approached auditioning, and now she loves auditioning.
Yeah.
So, um, so I will say, and I hate it, but the kids do end up where they're meant to go.
Mm-hmm.
What would I do differently? For me, probably what I would have wished I had understood better and done a little deeper dive into is just the cost.
Uh-huh.
I don't think I fully understood
All the different
just
costs that you're
how
gonna have. Yeah.
stinking expensive college is,
Yeah.
and where does the money come from and where does it not come from?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if I would have processed it a year or 2 prior, but until I was deep into it, and, like,
Mm-hmm.
now I'm like, "Oh, it's so clear to me now," um, I but even then, I don't know if it would have changed anything because I can't imagine my kid going to any other college,
Yeah.
so, um,
Well,
but
definitely, I want to talk a little more about scholarships as we get in there too. But
yeah,
I had you almost exactly hit a question that I had for you, just because you're someone who did start early, so it's worth noting that for as just you look at it, we met you in December of 2022. So I guess that's you're
junior
still
year.
junior year,
Yep.
winter of your junior year. And so you really, had some time as you were looking and approaching it. Did you feel like, I know you're someone who I saw in multiple parent meetings and webinars and all these things. Did you ever feel like you were ahead of the information? I mean, certainly you guys were. I mean, it's the experience often of people who start early. I think the biggest difference, it's not necessarily that you're going to be way, way more successful if you start early, but I think you often are way more relaxed in terms of like enjoying the
Yeah.
experience at each of the phases where I'm like, you always, like Michaela always looked relaxed. She always looked happy. It was like, which is nice just because it's like, felt like she knew what she was doing
Yeah.
and you guys felt like you knew what you were doing. Did you ever feel like a little ahead of it? Like, was it like, oh, well, I'm hearing this information again. I know what Unified is. Did you ever feel like, hey, I'm ahead of the ball in terms of sort of just the way you were consuming information?
I did actually. And I think that's just because I kept showing up.
Uh-huh.
I showed up on the webinars, I read things, I listened, and I took notes. And then that's just sort of, I'm like this little taskmaster person. So I'm
Yeah.
like, I just need to have my list of what can I do and what can I not do, and like overanalyze all of those things along the way. But
Yep.
I think my husband even joked as one of the parent Q&As at the end of the mock or something. He was like,
Yep.
"Do you really need to be in there? I
Like,
think you
couldn't you be
should have
leading this?
questions for them now because you've heard them so many times." I'm like,
Yeah.
"Well, no, I can't answer the questions, but it's nice to keep hearing it and confirm
Uh-huh.
that my understanding is on track."
Yep. I did feel like, sometimes I watch you taking notes or whatever. I'm like, she's more of like a TA at this point. I'm like, she really could be, she's at least ready to assess, help the class at least a little bit more than with her own questions. What was your consumption of online information? So were you a big Facebook group person? Were you taking on Insta and TikTok and YouTube information in terms of other
Mm.
parents going through? How were you consuming sort of other parents' experiences online?
Just Facebook. I'm actually still not on TikTok. My kids have one safe space.
Hmm. Fair, fair.
Um, Facebook, the parent groups, I'm still in them. I keep saying I'm not gonna be in them, but
No,
then there's
for
that
life. You'll be in it
that
for
little
life.
doer helper part of me that's like, "I'm just gonna chime
But
in."
were you doing some comparing and despairing? Were you, or some of it helpful to go, hey, I see what other people have done and what worked from the previous classes? Or were you going, oh God, that's making me more anxious? I just did an initial consult with a family who the mom was like, I feel so behind. I feel so bad. And I was like, you
Yeah,
need to take a break. You need to take a
yeah,
detox. Is it a little too much for you right now?
definitely all of the above. People can really spiral on those
Hmm.
Facebook groups, and there's also a lot of it's unavoidable, but there's like, "Oh, we've already done A, B, C, and
Right.
D." I'm like, "It's July 3rd, people,
Yep.
back off,
Yep.
like, slow down."
But maybe a
So,
little easier for you to hear as someone who's like also doing the thing where when if you're seeing it and you're going, oh my God, I haven't started at all, and it's
yeah,
July, then it really can panic you. And which, again, to say nothing wrong with these groups are wonderful, helpful information. We have a lot of families who
yeah.
get a ton of stuff from those groups, but
No, I was
definitely,
very grateful for the Facebook groups.
yeah,
I really was, but I did definitely quickly learn that you gotta step away.
yeah,
You can turn off the notifications,
yeah,
and you can also just keep scrolling.
yeah, yeah. Well, and how did you, especially you and your husband, how did you kind of navigate your own mental health through the process? So, I feel like from the in-person perspective, it definitely seemed like you maybe led more of the process with
Yeah.
Michaela, right? Is that in terms of how you divvied it up? But then were there a lot of debriefs that you and your husband were going to sit down and go, okay, I'm not going to tell Michaela this, but this is where I'm freaking out, and I wish she would do that. Like, how did you navigate kind of your own stress through the process?
Yeah, so I was definitely Michaela's admin assistant,
Uh huh.
um, to the net type to probably too much. No, actually, I don't think it was too much. I think it was necessary,
Yeah.
and she was lucky that I was able to do it.
Yes.
So, yeah. My husband is also my personal assistant.
So he's third on the
So he gets
power
to hear
rankings.
it all.
Yep. Hmm. That's funny.
So he gets to hear it. He has to I have to vet all of my stuff to him.
Yep.
But he's a huge reader as well. So then he would do some deep dives for information.
Uh-huh.
But I definitely had the reins of that.
Yep. I would say, I mean, obviously each parent-child relationship is different. And, there are all the different buckets that people fall into it. Sometimes it's easier when it's like, I don't know anything. Here you go, MTCA help. It's like, that's certainly from a a clarity perspective is very easy. But,
Yeah.
there often are parents who have some artistic expertise like you do and who do help artistically. Maybe are giving that kind of feedback.
Yeah.
I would say kind of across the board where people have, if the parent is able to be that admin assistant and do some of the scheduling, some of the keeping it on task, some of the spreadsheet stuff. Sometimes students are great at that too, and they don't need that. But I feel
Right.
like that is, I've never heard a kid complain about, I wish my mom hadn't helped me schedule. I wish my dad
Right.
hadn't helped me, make the spreadsheet and organize the requirements and, some of that stuff. Whereas sometimes the artistic side of things, sometimes it works, but sometimes we have kids who go, please, I need you to back off.
Yeah.
I need to do my own thing. I need
Yeah.
my safe space, as you said. But it
Yeah.
seems like that is a pretty popular way that they did it. How did you approach that in terms of, were you helping with literally scheduling the actual auditions in terms of that?
Yeah.
Were you helping with, hey, you need to schedule time to do your essays? We talked about that in terms of that.
Oh,
How
yeah.
much was that pushed by you versus pushed by Michaela?
A lot. Michaela's number one advice that I have heard her give anybody now is start your essays early because she
Hmm.
did not.
I
But
was I think should be hire Mindy. Hire Mindy to help you. She's a great personal assistant.
no, I
That's a
did
good
not
advice.
help with essays.
No, I mean to help you keep stay on task. That would have been good
Yeah.
advice from Michaela.
Um,
Yeah. No, but start your essays early. We hear that all the time. People,
right.
it sneaks up on you how many there are.
There's more than I think, even though I knew there were going to be a lot until you're in the thick of it. Um, so I really just felt like I was going to do whatever I could do that was what I call like data entry
Yep.
or travel agent work. Like
Yep.
Michaela had to go to school full time and she had to go to the studio for her performing arts programs full time
Yep.
and preparing her material and writing her essays. So I felt like there really weren't enough hours in the day for her to be doing those things and all the other stuff. So I was very happy to be able to take that on.
Yep.
So we kind of quickly, but I also knew that I couldn't keep pushing her and have us end up fighting each other.
Yep.
To her credit, even when she was completely stressed out and knowing that she was up against some heavy deadlines,
Hmm.
she I'm grateful that she never got angry with me. She never fought back against me. We quickly devised like a to-do list on a board in our kitchen, like a dry
Uh-huh.
erase board, and I would put up, here's your to-dos, and I would put my to-dos up there.
Uh-huh.
And then we each would just have to check them off. And several of them have dates, must be done by this date. And she is very much, I'm actually the same way. If something's due on the 1st, it'll get done on the 31st at about 11:58,
Yep.
but it gets done.
Yep. But you're planning all that. So you really are doing you're the whiteboard. You were at this summer masterclass panel, which I'm calling the panel of death, the parent panel of death. That this summer, it was so wonderful, but it was all like, we always try to have this diverse panel of different people from different schools. But for some reason, all of the parents were so organized. I feel like on that
Oh,
panel, it was like they were describing systems of color coded poster boards and the
yeah,
string
we weren't
across the
complicated.
room. And no, you were not that. You were not that level of like,
We were not that complicated.
okay,
No. I joked, I think, even on one of the Facebook groups, because people kept putting up these fancy boards that they
right.
put up. And I was like, that's like a lot of pressure right there. So
That is how I
we
just
had to
have to say that out loud. That like they show me these binders where I'm like, this is incredible with laminated whatever, and I'm like, okay, but my parents, if they were sitting in that audience, would have been like, good luck, Charlie. You're not getting into school for this. Like
I
that ain't
had a
happening.
little, like 5x8 spiral binder with a green cover. That little green binder
Yep.
lived like on my person for
Yep.
the whole year. And it was just all paper. I mean, I was just like a very front page with the schools and the dates and whatever.
Yep.
And then um, another piece of paper that I did type up because I have horrible handwriting. I did type up the dates that applications were due, and then I made, which was probably the most useful thing I did all along, was I wrote down every college's audition dates and
Yep.
where those auditions
Yep.
were ahead of time, because we needed a blueprint. That
Yep.
maybe that's not the right word, but we needed a path to know if you pass all 21
Yes.
pre-screens, where on earth and how on earth are you going to get these all in and do your high school musical and do
Yes.
this? So we sat down pretty early once we got that information and I plotted it all out. And then
Yes.
I basically told Michaela this is where you're going to do this college.
Right.
And this is when you're going to do this college. If you get, and she said, Mom, I'm not going to pass all my pre-screens. And I
Right.
said, well, we're going to assume you will, because we can cancel
Right.
one. We can
Much
exudate.
easier to remove a jigsaw puzzle piece than
Well, she
to add
passed
one
all
in.
the
Yeah.
pre-screens.
Yeah. Well, of
So
course you
she
did.
did pass all the pre-screens, and we did have to get them all in. So luckily, that was braggy. I don't mean that
No,
braggy,
this
but luckily
we're here to brag. Come on.
we
That's
planned
Michaela crushed
ahead.
it. Yeah. But
Luckily,
no,
we planned ahead, so we knew where we were going to go, and I
yep.
was able to piggyback a couple schools in one weekend that were
Yep.
close enough to, that type of thing.
Yep. And that may lead us to how you end up doing Elon early. I think it's a lot of people end up, as they look at that jigsaw puzzle, they go, well, this does actually make sense as one to potentially do earlier because they don't go to unifieds and all the different things. So you're
It was
sitting there
the
going, yeah,
only time she could do Elon is if she did the early one,
right.
because their February dates we were not going to make it there in February, no matter how much we would have liked to. So
Yep.
they really were, the first deadline was
Yep.
September 14th. I think she had to have
Because you're
the
doing the early
pre-screens in,
audition.
not the
Yeah.
application, luckily.
Yeah.
And
And that's
so
where it helps you having pulled those jigsaw pieces out earlier to recognize that and not be like, oh crap, now how do we move a unifieds
we would
audition?
not
Or,
be
yeah.
at Elon. We would
Yeah.
have, there's
You
no
would
way
take
we
as
would
well
have made
feelers.
it
Yeah.
to there in February. So she would have gone somewhere else.
Yep, totally. Okay, this is great. We're getting into some granular, and I got a bunch more granular questions, but let's take a short break here, and we'll be right back with some more, including the big question of, I heard that number 21, so we're gonna talk about numbers of schools. My gosh. Okay, we're back with Mindy Catron, and we floated a number of schools. That seems like a number of applications at the beginning, or that's just the number of pre-screens. You said 21. Do you know how many total schools Michaela ended up doing when you count Pittsburgh, when you count walk-ins, how many school auditions, and then how many applications? Do you have a sense of that?
So I can't believe I'm here without my little green
Oh,
notebook.
where's the green binder? See, she's
Oh
not that
no,
organized.
it's
So there
somewhere.
you go, parent panel of death. It's not everybody was so organized that they have every number
No,
memorized.
it's nothing fancy. Nothing fancy. She had 21 applications. Some of those were at Pittsburgh Unified, so they were covered by Pittsburgh. I think 4 of the schools out of that 21 were of her list were at Pittsburgh Unified.
Mm-hmm.
She did 1 walk-in.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe it was 22 in the end. She did end up applying to the school she did the walk-in for,
Yep.
but that was like super easy. That was like just the common app supplement. So I
But
mean,
then it seems like didn't end up applying to a ton of the Pittsburgh schools that
she
weren't
did
originally on
not.
her list.
No, she added one. I think she added 1 school. She got,
I know for sure. I looked at the email before this conversation that she added 1 school. Yeah.
yeah, she got some very nice offers
Yep.
from schools, but
But didn't decide to add them.
she didn't apply to all of them. She, I think, only added 1 school to her list after
Yep.
Pittsburgh.
And was that because now we're starting to hear back from these pre-screen passes and feeling more confident in terms of like, hey, maybe I don't need to add. I already have 22 schools, 21 schools at that point. I don't need to add. Was that
Yeah.
part of that decision-making process?
Yeah, definitely. And just for her, what turned out to be very positive feedback from Pittsburgh made her feel like, you know what, I'm going to be okay.
I love it. I love
And
that.
um, so she didn't, a lot of the schools, she was so stinking flattered and honored, whether it
Yep.
was a callback, like a pre-screen pass, or where she got a few direct offers.
Yep.
She took none of that for granted.
Yep.
And was so honored and flattered. But several times she'd be like, I don't really want to go there.
Yep.
Which has nothing to do with the school itself. A lot it was just the location. A lot of times it was location. I don't really want to go to that particular location,
Yep.
not the school itself. But
Totally. I love that. And I think it's such a good, I mean, again, you're only speaking toward your experience and with just the caveat that everyone's experience is going to be different in terms of
yeah,
your child and all the different things. But I think it's one of the places where the process has gotten really inflated because of people's anxiety, and I
yeah,
do think, I'll say Michaela's in like the 25% of students who did not self-identify as having anxiety, at least in the initial consult with her. And I think really is kind of remarkable in terms of how not stressed out both of you guys were throughout this process. I mean, I think it is rare that we don't see at least some moments of freak out, and I'm sure you had them privately, but from your perspective, it seemed like
yeah.
you guys you were calm. I remember totally ready at her mock, she was totally ready at Pittsburgh when we saw calm and ready. She didn't feel like, oh my God, what am I about doing? She knew what she was doing. So that not every student is going to be in that place. And some of that, yes, is about starting early and just sort of where Michaela was training wise. But I think because of that anxiety, and honestly, I think because of reading some stuff online, people will sometimes hear the last number that someone last year did in terms of schools and think, well, I have to do that many. So they'll hear I did 30 schools, which you could say you did, I don't know what it ends up, 40 schools if you count all the Pittsburgh schools that you technically auditioned for, even though you
Yeah.
didn't apply. And people go, does that mean I need to do 40? If I do less than 40, am I not
Wow.
going to do well? And it kind of
Really
just
easy to get
becomes
caught up
a
in that.
self-fulfilling process. Yeah, go ahead.
It would be easy to get caught up in that. But I didn't, and she didn't. She had a really good friend who also used MTCA, a year older, and he told her he auditioned and ended up applying to like 30 schools.
Yeah,
And he sat and looked at her and he said, "Don't do that."
don't do it. It's right.
Because
You don't
if
need to.
you really
Yeah,
don't want to go to a school, don't apply.
yeah,
Just don't get caught up and think you have to apply to all of them. Just if you really don't think you would ever see yourself going somewhere, don't
yeah,
even apply. And she really took his advice to heart. And then I feel like we got similar advice from everyone at
yeah,
MTCA. Like build your list. And we also had some schools on her list that were big reach schools artistically, but financially. And I
yeah,
said, please understand that if you get into these, I think there were 5 schools on her list specifically. I said, unless the heavens open,
yeah,
there's just no way we can possibly send you there. And I do not want to break your heart.
yeah,
But she said, I totally get it, but I want to see.
yeah.
And I said, plus you hear stories. You hear
Right.
stories that
Of course.
scholarships appears, but we were very clear about that too. So I think she did not let herself get caught up in it. She also wasn't on Facebook, so she wasn't seeing a lot of
She's
the
not
stuff
seeing
that I
every.
saw and I wasn't
Yeah.
about to share.
That's smart. No, caught up is a good way of saying it because you had a really cogent approach to the process. And again, it's not that there wouldn't be a specific student who maybe 30 schools ends up being right for them if a certain number of pre-screen rejections happen and they go, I need to add more schools to the list. I mean, again, there's not
Absolutely.
one size fits all, but for you to make those decisions, it seems like with deliberation and just clear eyes to go, hey, I'm getting these offers from Pittsburgh. I'm also getting all these pre-screen yeses. I'm going to add this school because I really connected with this faculty member, but I'm not necessarily, Michaela and you were still kind of using this process for yourself as the customer and the consumer, which is what it is, versus sometimes I think just the desperation and the nerves can make you feel like, oh God, I have to do everything and anything because anything I'm not doing means I'm so far behind the 8 ball. And
Yeah.
we talked to students last year and, that by the time they're at Unified, they're like, I've already done 30 applications and
Yeah.
35 schools. And they're like, I'm a little tired and burnt out. And now here are my most important schools that I'm actually trying to audition for. And we
Yeah.
go, that's the process almost overtaking you as opposed to you kind of really doing the process.
Yeah.
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 What about anything in terms of, you ended up doing a lot. Some of that's the jigsaw puzzle of it, sure too. But you did a lot in 2023, meaning so before the new year flipped over, you did a lot. I tried to do a year. We'll see if I got that right. How did you feel about doing that is a little atypical compared to most families in terms of how much you ended up doing in the early side of things. How did you like doing Pittsburgh? And then it seems like Emerson, Point Park, Penn State, Elon. You did a couple schools on that earlier side of things. How did that
We
feel for
did.
you?
We did, and we did them a little bit against some of the recommendations of like Leo saying, don't do these schools. If you love these schools, don't do them
Yeah.
early. But the reality was we knew we couldn't do them all in February.
Yep.
So, and Michaela felt ready.
Yep.
Like she did what's it called in August? The summer faculty,
So faculty
the week.
masterclass. Yeah. The week. Yep.
Thank you. Suddenly those were words that would not come out of my brain. She finished that week and she had done TPAP just
Yep.
prior to that. And she had been working her songs and her
Yep.
monologue. And we left that day, the last day, the parent Q&A of that week. And she was like, I just want to film my pre-screens. Like
Yep.
I just want to, I feel good. I don't want to get away from it too far.
Yep.
I don't want to get stale. And I think for her, sprinkling her auditions out between November to Chicago Unifieds, what was that, the first week of February. So
Mm-hmm.
she did all of hers between the those 2 months, over those 2 months. Kind of sprinkled them out where, for her, it worked, and
Mhm.
she felt happy and
Yep.
she went to one audition where she did not feel good and was a little disappointed in herself,
Uh-huh.
but she really did enjoy, but that one she spun around, she was happy when we left,
Yep.
but, she really got to enjoy the process,
Yep.
and because where we live, we could drive to several of the schools, and I always say we're a family who drives. We think nothing of getting in the car and driving for 8 or 9 hours. So,
Yep.
um, financially, that's how we could do some things as well. We could just drive and go. She really wanted to do her High School Musical,
Mhm.
and that musical runs in March, which means tech is happening by February. And I was
Yep.
like, well, then you have to get all your stuff done by Chicago
Yep. By
Unified.
Chicago Unified. Yep.
And she also had to show the weekend of New York Unifieds, which we've always known would be the same weekend.
Yep.
So I'm like, we're gonna have to be ready early because
Right. That's our plan.
you can't
Yep.
wait to the Unifieds to do them all. And
Yep.
so that's why we had to be really strategic.
I love that, and I really love that you took from us. I hope all of our families feel this way of like, hey, we're going to give you some general advice of what has worked for the vast majority of our families, and these, but that like that you took the ownership of like this is what your process is. Certainly, it's something we always would tell you artistically of like once you go in the room, you're the one auditioning, but
Right.
also as families, like it is your process. Like I actually think you're not countering our advice as much as you maybe
No,
think you are in
I
terms
mean,
of really
we
that's yeah.
yeah,
But because
we
you were
did
ready,
go.
and in general, I think it is the atypical student who is really ready by the
Yeah,
fall of their senior year, really ready after the masterclass to film pre-screen. That's atypical. In the same way that I wonder if they said this to Michaela at Elon. I mean, for many years they would say like, "Hey, just so you know, if we really liked you, you're probably going to get deferred. We're probably not going to get. It's probably
yeah,
not going to be an immediate yes."
yeah.
She did get an early yes. That
She
is rare. That's not most students who are getting an early actual yes from an early audition.
we went there with the same assumption.
Yep,
But, I mean, we did ultimately go with Leo's blessing,
for
but
sure.
also with, Ann Nathan, we ran it by Ann, was like, "What do you think?" And she said, "She's ready,
She's
let her
ready. Right.
go,
That's
just
right.
don't put him off."
Yep.
So, you have to do you exactly we had to do what made sense for us for many different reasons,
For
and
sure. Well,
luckily for her, I think it worked.
and it's just like often people will say like, "Oh, MTCA says don't do your High School Musical." I'm like, we really don't say that. We
No,
want you to consider it, but and so people often hear, "Oh, I never thought about not doing it." That's what therefore MTCA is saying don't do it. But often we're just saying, really, how do you think about it? I'd love to hear a little bit. So you mentioned the High School Musical. How did you think about, especially the fall with pre-screens, given that it's August and she hadn't done her dance yet? The fall with the pre-screens and anything that's going on with school there, and then looking at that spring. How were you scheduling those blocks of time to navigate all the school activities, the
mm,
musical, and then I mean, I think this right now, as we're going to release this in September, a lot of our seniors are dealing with exactly that of going, "Whoops, I'm a little more behind," and now starts the fall play. Ooh, in my AP classes and how I navigate all that. And then again, you mentioned in the spring all the actual literal travel for auditions. So how did how did you approach that? How did you have conversations where Michaela did give up anything, or what was most important to hold on to? How did you kind of prioritize all that?
yeah, she gave something very big up. She gave up dance company. So
Hmm.
she's in at the studio, she's in her they have 2 companies. They have the musical theater company and they have the dance company. She had actually never been in her High School Musical ever, uh,
Wow.
because it always conflicts with,
Hmm.
um, dance company, competition dates. She does musicals through the performing arts studio, so it wasn't like she never did musicals, she just wasn't in her High School Musical, and we come from a town that has the High School Musical is a real big deal, and people come from all over to see it because it's pretty high caliber
Yep.
performance that happens, because we're so close to New York City, we have a lot of access to
Hmm.
some really good talent and help. So, she said, "How am I gonna go to college for musical theater, and I've never been in my High School Musical, this is so crazy,"
Yep.
and so for her, not only just because of the college audition process, but I was like, "You just literally can't do it all," and
Yep.
frankly, even if she hadn't been in a musical, I was like, "I don't think you can be in dance company and do all this college
Right.
work either." We had seen other kids do it, and it's a lot.
Yep.
Um, it's also a lot for the people you work with. So, for Michaela, she holds herself very accountable. So, if she's gonna do something, she's going to be there,
Right.
and if she's gonna miss a lot of rehearsals, that's not how she
You're
does
letting
stuff.
your
When
company down.
other
Yeah.
people do it, it makes her crazy. So, she
Hmm.
was also said, I can't be that person now that's just not here because I'm doing auditions.
Yep.
That's not fair to the other people.
Yep.
So that was a big, big, tough decision. And it was and at first, actually, my husband especially didn't think it was the right decision.
Yep.
Um, but in the end, it was the right decision. She followed her gut.
Not a right decision. Did he think strategically from the college perspective, or just like, hey, this is senior year and you've been working with this company for so long, like you want to play varsity, whatever, you're a senior. Like, is it more about that experience of
Yeah,
the
he
high
was
school
like, "The
experience?
studio has done so much for her.
Hmm.
She's been such a part of them. I don't know." I mean, she didn't leave the studio. She just left part of what she was
Right.
doing there,
Yep.
but it had been a very big part of her life. But he came
Yeah.
around very
Those are
quickly and realized it was the right thing. And
hard
she
and
got
personal
to do
decisions.
the
Yeah.
and also I was like, "You don't know if you're gonna get cast in the show.
Yep. True.
You've never been in the show.
Yep.
You haven't like worked up to it.
Yep.
There's usually seniority situations." But
Yep.
she kept saying, "I don't care. I don't care what I am. I just want to be
I
in
want
it."
to do it. Yep. Well, and
Um,
actually, timing wise, I mean, when it works out that way, it makes it a little trickier if you're thinking about doing LA Unifieds. But actually, like that March, if March is tech, end of February to March, that's not the
yeah.
worst timing of like you're finished, you're waiting on results,
Yeah,
have a little distraction.
her bigger conflicts were the, performing arts studio because
Yeah.
that's all weekends and
Yeah.
evenings.
Yep.
Actually, the High School Musical, the way it fell, wasn't that much of a conflict because but we had to get those auditions done
Yeah.
early. We
Yeah.
couldn't be doing auditions mid, late February, and there was no way that was gonna fly.
Totally. All right. Well, let's get to March and April or early April. How did you guys do at sort of synthesizing? First, I want to hear about like the actual audition itself. How did you synthesize? So, would Michaela tell you all the juicy details, and were you analyzing that? Were you just waiting for the results as they came in? And then, how did you kind of like look at were you looking at portals? Did you have a shared family email account that you're checking? Is she checking it? How did that work as you're sort of getting and receiving those results?
Yeah, so we did set up a dedicated email that
Yep.
we both had access to. Um, I tried really hard not to open the emails before
Mm-hmm.
she could see them, even though I would see that they had come in usually while she was still in class,
Mm-hmm.
um,
But you're
I
seeing the emails, but not opening. So you clicking, marking back as unread as if you didn't do it.
maybe a little bit. I would say by the time we got into, um, decision time, I was not opening anything
Yeah.
before she had time to open it.
Yeah.
When it came to pre-screen passes, honestly, she saw most of them before I did
Uh-huh.
anyways. She was telling me, but, uh, I would quickly I would quickly need to know because we would need to get the audition booked
Yeah.
before it
Going to
was full.
schedule.
Date
Yep.
was gone.
Totally.
So, I did a lot of the audition booking
Mm-hmm.
because I usually had the access on my computer. If she was in class or something, I could just jump on, grab the date that we had already agreed upon that she was
Mm-hmm.
gonna do her audition and, make sure. So we got to do every audition on the day that we had originally hoped to because we
Wow.
jumped quickly.
That also is I mean, it's awesome. Part of that's because you did get your pre-screens in a little bit earlier with I'm sure that helped. But also the fact that you got every single date that you wanted is many of our families have to do a rejiggering
I
of the
think
jigsaw
that's because
puzzle.
I heard enough people say do that, so
Yeah.
I did that.
That's so
Um,
smart.
we didn't get everything in early because she didn't get her essays done early.
Uh-huh.
So some of our things were pushed to November 1st. There were some
Wow.
December 1st deadlines because we didn't have she had all her artistic stuff done by September 14th.
Right.
Um,
But it's
but
just
she
those
did
essays.
not
Yeah.
have her, academic applications all ready to go. So, some people will do the flip-flop of that. So
Yes.
she was ready early artistically, and then it was this grueling
Yeah,
push.
getting those essays. But still impressive that you got all those dates. I'm surprised with some November submissions that they weren't like, sorry, that day's full. That day, good for you that you got them all.
The only early well, so we did early action was Elon
Mm-hmm.
and Boko and Emerson.
Mm-hmm.
So Elon and Emerson were in November.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Boko, I can't remember when Boko, I think it was also in November,
Mm-hmm.
actually, but not the same weekend because she had a conflict. We could have
Mm-hmm.
done them the same weekend, but we had to make 2 trips to Boston.
2 trips to Boston from New
3
Jersey.
trips
Come
to
on.
Boston. Yeah.
Well, how did you ultimately come to a decision? So I know Michaela had a ton of killer options. It's really up to you in terms of what specifics you want to share. So I won't say them out loud, but a lot of really most competitive schools and just great schools across the board that Michaela had to choose from. How did you sort of navigate? I want to hear kind of both the preferential choice in terms of like where she ultimately wanted to go, and then how that lined up. You mentioned money, of going, how did that line up with scholarship negotiation, and were you getting the most amount of money from the school that you wanted to go to ultimately? How
Yeah.
did that work in terms of sort of where you wanted to go, and then how it worked with negotiation for you?
I would say of the schools that she got accepted to, she very quickly had like a top 3 or 4
Mm-hmm.
of her personal desire.
Yep.
There were a couple that were way too expensive.
Yep.
And I had told her, um, I can say the name of the
Please
school,
do.
right?
If you really, I'm just letting you share it. But if you're up for it, I think it's helpful to hear. What were the
So
names?
she fell in love. She didn't know if she was going to really actually love Boco, but she
Uh-huh.
did fall in love with Boco
This
while
is
she was
Boston
there.
Conservatory for those who are not quick with the
Right.
abbreviations. No, it's fine.
And that was one of those schools I was like, sure, apply.
Uh-huh.
Let's go check it out. But it's really pricey.
Yep.
And we've heard they don't give a lot of scholarship money.
Yep.
So she actually did love it there.
Yep.
And they actually gave her more of a scholarship than I would have expected,
Yep.
but still was nowhere near enough.
Yep.
But then some other offers came in. She also, I don't think she fully knew what she wanted in
Yep.
a school or a program until about April.
Yep. I mean,
Um,
I saw the initial consult fill out, but though this, of course, was really pretty early in your process, but it was
yeah,
more vague. It was pretty vague in terms of very balanced program, as always said. I don't know what size I want or really much about any schools yet. That's what, when you came
and
to us,
almost
that's where we were.
every school she went, whether it was big Penn State, she was like, I love this. And then
Yep.
we would go to a smaller school. I love,
Love
like, she
this.
could
Yeah.
find things that she liked
Yep.
about everywhere she went.
Yep.
And, but it took a while for her to really get down to the nitty gritty, then also of conservatory versus liberal arts.
Right.
She also was a little bit back and forth about that. And at the end of the day, it came down for her to realizing that she actually wanted, first of all, she didn't want to be in any city. She didn't want to be in New York City. She was
Uh-huh.
very clear from the beginning. She did not want to go to school in New York City.
Yep.
She also didn't want to go anywhere too close to home. She wanted to
Uh-huh.
go away to school.
Yep.
So, um, but then by the time we got to March, April, and we went back again to visit Point Park, and we didn't actually go back to Boston, but we'd been to Boston twice. We'd been in Chicago for Chicago Unifieds. And she was like, you know what? I really just don't want to be in any city.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that I don't want to be in New York City right now. I don't want to be in any city. I really want a college
Yeah.
campus.
Campus experience. Yep.
And then for her, it was size. She didn't want to be in a real small school.
Mm-hmm.
She loved Baldwin Wallace. It felt small.
Yeah.
The
I was going
school
to say.
itself felt small. And then she also realized, I don't really want a conservatory.
Yeah.
I would like to have a little life outside of my program. Um, I think hearing the directors from Elon and Emerson and Michigan talk about why they think it's important to have a liberal arts degree
Uh-huh.
with their BFA resonated with her.
Uh-huh.
She likes to learn. You know
Yep.
what I mean?
Yeah.
She
Almost
wants.
was an architect, we found out. Come on. Of course.
Charlie, 20 years from now, when she's an architect.
Yes. You said you never do Pilates. She said she'd never be an architect. We'll see. We'll see where we end up.
But I think it just took her a little longer to sift through all the things to realize. And I
Yep.
don't think she was afraid to determine exactly what she wanted, because I'm sure there was a part of her that was like, but what if I don't get that? I
Right.
better keep my
Uh-huh.
mind open
Yep.
to some other possibilities.
It's
Money,
so, yeah.
big factor.
Yep. We feel like, I started doing this 20 years ago. My gosh. But,
Yeah.
20, it's the same way we started talking about some of the inflation of how it used to be like pulling teeth to like get people to add a double digit schools. And now it's like they're all coming in and saying, I'm going to do 50 schools. We go, no, you're not. You don't need to do 50 schools.
Oh,
I feel the
boy.
same way about like dream schools. I think people always used to come in with basically my one dream school, and then here are my couple others or whatever. And now I almost feel like students are so afraid to have a dream school, which of course we always have encouraged. Don't have one school. There's not one school with all the answers, but
Right.
also but let yourself dream. Let yourself,
Yeah.
envision. I want this. Sometimes it's
Yeah.
like they almost don't want to say they want anything specific because they're worried about getting crushed. We go, let yourself dream and let yourself get your heart broken and have another dream. But like having multiple dreams and being able to go, I think I see myself doing this. There's a kind of vulnerability that I feel like sometimes in the past maybe 5-10 years,
Yeah,
students are a
she
little
wouldn't let
afraid to do.
herself have a dream. Well, she would not verbalize to anybody
Right.
that she had a dream school. Now I know for sure there was one school.
There was a
There was
crush.
she was heartbroken over one school,
Yep.
but I don't think she's heartbroken anymore.
Yep. Well, there'll be more loves and more
I
loves
know
in our
she
life, of course.
Yeah.
What about? I love this because I think you are such a savvy kind of consumer, and you're certainly a savvy customer of MTCA, but I think a savvy consumer of this process. I'd love to hear. Was there a bit of advice that you heard from us, or from anyone else, actually, advice from the parent page or from MTCA, and just things in the process that you go, that really stuck with me. It's something I'd want to relay, like Michaela with her essay thing. And was there anything that you didn't hear? That you maybe, especially as a note for us, is there anything you didn't hear from us that you go, I really wish they were saying this in these parent meetings. I really wish you'd added in, it's really helpful to tell the families this, but you're not saying that. So was there, anything that we said or that someone said that really stuck with you, and then anything that you feel like was kind of missing advice wise?
I'm a little stumped, I'll be honest. I think more than anything, it was just realizing that you can only do the tasks in the moment that need to be done.
Mm-hmm.
And I can remember at one point going, I don't know, how are we going to negotiate these deals? How are we going to
Uh-huh.
figure out the money? But I didn't really need to know that back in January because we
Uh-huh.
weren't there anyways. But so a little bit of like, just stay where you are in the race and don't
Yep.
worry about the next part. Just kind of focus where you are in each little phase so you're ready for the next phase.
But how does that square? And I think because I think it's such good advice, and I think it's where some of those parents get confused. How do you square stay in the part of the process you're in, the chapter that you're in,
Yeah, I know.
versus some of like, hey, looking ahead and seeing that jigsaw puzzle from the next chapter ended up really helping me. How did you kind of square? I know I need to look ahead and have an understanding of stuff, but some stuff I don't need to know every bit of yet.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a total hypocrite. So this really is a hindsight
Right.
situation where in the moment my mind would already be racing to the next thing.
Right.
So I
Which in
think
some ways it seems like helped you, but in some ways you go, there's stuff that I go, I didn't need
in
to worry
some
about
ways,
that.
yes, I'm a planner. So I overanalyze, I overplan, I
Yep.
figure out, all the scenarios of how we're going to get from there to there. And I think to some degree that was absolutely necessary. I don't think I wasted too many brain cells and
Yep.
lack of sleep over planning.
Right.
I really don't. It was necessary to plan, and it was a full-time job on top of my full-time job.
Yep.
Um, but I I felt pretty I think we both felt pretty
Yep.
prepared, uh, to handle things as they came along, and
Yep.
maybe some of that is because I also used to perform,
Right.
so I knew where to push with her, I knew where not to push with her. My job at auditions was to be, present from a distance.
Yep.
I would just say, "What do you need? I'm gonna go get coffee. You wanna do your warm up now? Yeah, I'm
Mhm.
gonna do my vocal warm up." I would disappear, you
Uh-huh.
know? I tried to give her the space to do what she needed to do and also know that I couldn't fix anything when it didn't go well.
Yep.
Um, she had a couple. Oh God, she's so stinking lucky that most everything she felt great and enjoyed the whole process.
Yep.
We had just one, maybe two moments where she came out a little weepy or teary or disappointed.
Yep.
And, you just got to let them have their moment. And I actually heard her say to somebody recently that she was really grateful that I did that
Mhm.
I didn't try to insert myself into her artistic journey.
Yep.
I just tried to support her, and I think maybe that's because I know what that feels
Right.
like, and
Yep.
other parents might not know what that feels like,
Yep.
or they wanna be like, "I wanna hear your songs." Well, you know what? They don't wanna sing their songs for you. It's very private. It's
Yep.
very vulnerable.
Yep. It's so tough, especially because there are times when you would be right in inserting yourself in to some extent of going, you should be doing this. And maybe it's your stress that's not letting you do it, but still to give the space. Or even when you're right about something like that audition probably wasn't that bad. It probably was pretty good. But to be able to go, in this moment, you're disappointed in yourself. And I've been disappointed in myself as a performer.
Yeah,
I know what that
yeah.
is. And I'm just going to let you be there. It's really smart.
Do you know the one thing I can recall where I did insert myself and I probably waited too long to insert myself was, um, she needed to change her monologue, her acting coach.
Mm-hmm.
And she was so resistant. She was so worried about hurting the coach's feelings. And I'm just seeing the money,
Mm-hmm.
because, and the coach was wonderful, but their schedules, they could
Yep.
not get their schedules together. And then they did. And I could just tell Michaela wasn't
Yep.
working. And she was so, as a student, as a teenager, was like, I don't want her to be upset with me. And I did insert myself and reached out to Leo to say, we need some help.
Yep.
And he called immediately and we talked it through. And within an hour, she was talking with another coach and it was a match made in heaven. And
Yep.
their schedules lined up. So Michaela's schedule was so tough.
Yep.
And her coach was also a working actor and so would be off on location at that
Yep.
time. Like, it was just circumstantial. There was nothing wrong with that coach. It was just a rough circumstances. But I had to insert myself there, and I probably should have done it a week sooner.
Yeah. I love that. It's such good advice. And I think, of course, people want to be polite and everyone wants to be liked and all those things, but we're
Yeah.
also going, certainly on the MTCA end, I'm like, there's never an ego about, from the
No.
coach perspective, we go, of course, we want what's best for you. I mean, and we've all had that happen where you go, this is just not, whether it's not a perfect fit artistically or whether it's not a schedule fit, but there is something, and it's so important in this career in general. It's like, how can you, still with humility, still with kindness, but how can you put yourself first? Because in your
Yeah.
process, that the most important thing is that Michaela's monologues are working in the right direction. That's more important than anyone else's feelings about it or ego. And that's true for the dance competition too, to say, of course, I so honor what you've done for me, but this is what I need for my process. This is
Right.
my college career. This is, to put yourself
And
first is, yeah,
respected her for it. Of course, I'm sure the
absolutely.
director was crushed, but he respected that she was like, this is what I need to do,
I
you
love
know?
it. Let's end with a little advice for the kids themselves. So, I'd love to hear. Often we end with sort of advice to the parents when we're talking about to artists of how do you support your kid. But I'd love to hear kind of what do you think Michaela did well in kind of navigating her relationship with both of you through this process. And is there anything you wish she did differently in terms of were there places she could have been a bit easier on mom and dad, or places where you go, we just could have communicated better as a family. And I think I wish Michaela had spoken up about this, or were there
Mm.
any things that you feel like she did really well, or anything you feel like you would have wanted if you were advising a kid to do differently when talking to their parent?
Sorry about my dog. Siggy. My advice to the students. I think something that resonated very greatly for me and Michaela was one of her dearest friends, also an MTCA student, a year older. We were at the junior weekend Q&A,
Mm-hmm.
and Valeria, everybody, I know you know Valeria. Valeria and
Mm-hmm.
Michaela have grown up together. Valeria said at the end of the day, at all these auditions, one after the other, she said, I just kept telling myself that I just get to sit here and do what I love for these people over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
Just get to do what I love. And that really resonated with me. And I know it resonated with Michaela, who still was struggling with some audition nerves.
Mm-hmm.
And something flipped in her, and she really did enjoy her auditions. Like,
Mm-hmm.
she saw them as an opportunity to get to do what she loves, to get to know and talk to these directors and faculty. She really loved the process. She loved the master classes. Like, she was sad. Her
Mm-hmm.
last audition at Chicago Unifieds, she looked at me and I was like, that's it. That's your last
Mm-hmm.
one. And she actually got a little emotional. She
Yep.
said, I'm kind of sad. I've loved this. She loved the camaraderie
Mm-hmm.
amongst the other students, which
Mm-hmm.
was a huge win.
Mm-hmm.
That it was not, she never felt a very competitive atmosphere. Everybody was there to help each other. Someone needed shoes one day, then someone lend their shoes. She was looking for something and somebody else lent.
Yep. Here's
She
a
really
speaker
just
for your
loved
Bluetooth or
it.
whatever. Yeah.
And
Yep.
I would encourage anybody that's embarking on this to try to find the joy in it. I'd go so far to say that if you can't find the joy in it, this might not be it for you,
Mm-hmm.
because this is a lot of what your future is going to be.
Mm-hmm. It's so well said. I mean, sometimes it feels like the people can't find the joy if it's because they're just underprepared, if they're feeling the stress. But if you are prepared and you're not able to eventually enjoy
Right.
it, I do think that's not a great sign. It's not. And most students, I do think, get to that place by unifieds. By the time they're in the Mesa auditions, most people get to that place. I think what was remarkable about you and something to hopefully emulate is that Michaela and you found that so early in the process. Most students do not find that in October and November where they're like, this is fun. I love this. They're like, oh my God. What? And then eventually they go, oh my gosh, relax. This is fun.
Right.
I'm learning that. It feels like you guys learned that really early in the process.
And she started artistically early. So that's why she could feel ready.
Yep. Anything else we need to promote? We can, of course, follow you on Instagram at MF Catron. That's CATRON. And maybe we can check out AlignWellnessStudio.com if we want some Pilates and wellness in the Millburn, New Jersey area. Anything else we need to promote?
Oh, gosh. No, not for me.
Great. Well, thank you for doing this for us, Mindy. This was so fun to get to chat with you.
Thank you.